So my name is Jot Singh. I'm the Policy and Research Manager at SALDEF, and I'll be hopefully moderating this discussion once we're all lined up on the speaker side. I've been leading our censorship work and the publication of our 2 censorship reports on social media censorship of the Sikh community globally. So I'll also introduce, I think Jasveer has accepted his invitation as a speaker. So Jasveer Singh is the Senior Press Officer for the Sikh Press Association. Thank you very much for being here, Jasveer. Jus, I think, is also accepted. Jus is a Sikh activist and the founder of the Sikh Network in the UK. He's a founder member of the Sikh Network and an advisor to the Sikh Federation. Let's see if anyone else has accepted their invites. Okay, so I'll just keep introducing our speakers as they kind of figure it out. We're also going to be joined by Hardeep Singh, a freelance journalist and deputy director of the Network of Sikh Organizations, and Jaskaran Sandhu, who may be a bit late, co-founder of Buzz News and board member of the World Sikh Organization. So I think we can probably get started here, unless the comms team tells me not to. I guess we can hop in. So Jasveer and Just, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute so we can just do a quick mic check and then we can get into some of the questions.
Sure. Can you hear us?
Yep.
I think we can hear both Jasveer and Just. Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you both so much for speaking out on this issue, which I know affects Sikhs around the world. And yeah, let's just hop right into it and see where the conversation goes. So, as we know, censorship is not just about silencing Sikh voices. It's about erasing our history and our right to exist. And we need to stand up against it, speak out against it, and demand that our voices be heard. So to that end, SALDEF has, this is the first of 2 plugs, SALDEF has published, as I mentioned, a couple of censorship reports just exploring how the community was silenced online during moments of great upheaval in the Punjab. One, of course, being the farmers' protest and the censorship of the farmer community that was protesting back in 2020 and into 21. And the other is the Amritpal Singh manhunt. I will note, of course, that SALDEF does not endorse any of the actions or rhetoric of Amritpal Singh, but we did our best to monitor and track how the entire community in the Punjab was punished by the regime as they hunted this one individual. So with that, I'd like to hop into the first question to both of our speakers, and Hardeep is here as well. So I think I'll start with Jasveer. What are some of the ways that online censorship has personally affected you?
Yeah, so firstly, again, thanks for having us, guys. Much appreciated. The issue of Sikh censorship is one that has affected us all as individuals and as organizations. A lot of us maybe perhaps don't even realize it from within the Sikh community, because the way censorship works is that it's denied information from getting to certain segments of the community. So with the Sikh Press Association, we have found ourselves completely censored in India. That's with Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We've had the government notifications to say that our Twitter account is not allowed to be seen there, and received screenshots from people as well just to verify that the account doesn't show up there. Beyond that, I think there's definite issues of shadow banning, which are a bit more difficult to prove, but can be seen in patterns of the type of information and post content that we share on social media, and the various differences in terms of what type of content goes further. But also just in terms of kind of what we face, what we see, the Sikh Press Association, we're also an organization that will tackle issues of censorship that members of Sangha, the Sikh congregation, bring to us. And I'll just give one example of the levels we're at when it comes to censorship now, and how bad the situation is. Just in April of this year, there was a documentary on BBC One, UK terrestrial domestic TV. It was called Married, Sick and Wanting a Baby. It was about a fantastic group called Himmat Co that do work supporting people on their fertility journeys from a Sikh lens, so within the Sikh community mainly. And part of the documentary saw the documentary team visit the home of the family of the group that were being followed, sorry, the family that were being followed throughout the documentary. And in the home of this family, like many Sikh families, they had a picture up on the wall of Sant Janel Singh Khalsa Pindrawale. And this picture of Santji on the wall was blurred out. So the mere background image of such a respected Sikh figure was deemed inappropriate to be shown, even though it's a background picture that wasn't given any kind of prominency within the actual, within the scene itself. But just a background picture in the home of a Sikh family was blurred out, was censored, was erased from the depiction of that family that was given. So yeah, we're in a very difficult place now when it comes to censorship. It can manifest itself in many forms and be quite quite brutal in the way that, you know, there's just a blanket covering up of certain segments of the Sikh community and Sikh ideology.
Wow. Yeah, that's harrowing. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to ask the same question to Just now. How has online censorship affected you personally, has affected your organization, and just if you could go through the same experiences you may have had or similarities, that would be really interesting.
Sure, Hanji. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh to all the listeners. So this is an interesting one in terms of censorship, because obviously people have become aware of it more recently, as you mentioned at the start, particularly around the farmers' protests and all the activity that was ongoing around that time. But actually, for us in the UK, there's been sort of two key trigger dates. One, which was really where, and we'll touch on this through the call, but really where the groundwork was put in around where the Indian government identified the media, or specifically the Sikh media, as a threat. And that was really around 2015 when Modi visited the UK. And it was a well-publicized visit, and there was a dossier which accompanied that visit with the intelligence services of India. And in that, it contained a whole load of stuff, much of it that's relevant today regarding the late Shaheed Avtar Singh Kunda, but a lot of it was around targeting and clamping down on the Sikh media TV channels at the time. That were Sikh Channel, Akal, Sangat TV. Because of the prachar that was happening on the channels, that we had our own platforms, we were able to share our history, our issues, the human rights abuses, the struggle for Sikh freedom, and all the discrimination that was happening. And they saw that as a threat. And activities and actions were put into place from that visit, which we're still feeling the effects of today. And the second key date really is what affected both me personally and many Sikh organizations, really around 2020, where my page, other pages, Sikh organizations that I work with, the Sikh Federation, we were banned in January 22 on Twitter. When I say banned, it was withheld in India. And so we were getting notices around end of 2021 that your account has had a notice from the government of India through its legal department that those accounts should be withheld in India. And without any appeal, without any process, a few months later, as I said, in January 22, we then got a notice to say our accounts were withheld. And having spoken to people in India, my page personally and other pages just weren't visible. So that started the trend really on Twitter. And to say Twitter is openly now withholding Sikh organization accounts, Sikh personalities, and Sikh commentators within India. And then to say that actually Twitter is probably still the most allowing platform of all the other social medias. Mm-hmm. Instagram, Facebook have gone way beyond just banning in India. And we'll touch on some of those. But really my experience was seeing that first, you when you get a legal notice, right, you think, hold on, what's going on here, right? And at that time, it was just very few that had received it. And then it just became, some will say a badge of honor, but just a standard approach that anybody who was saying anything questioning India, then they would get this notice, and it's just become routine now.
Yeah, absolutely. The point, I love the point about sort of momentum, right? It began a few years ago, but it's like every success this regime has in successfully manipulating social media to kind of reflect their narrative and no others, it seems to beget more brazenness and beget more sort of aggression on their part to act globally. I appreciate your point as well. As you said, we'll get more into the platforms themselves and their different processes and how they fail, Sikh users. But I also want to make sure we extend the first question to Hardeep. So Hardeep, thank you for joining us. And I'm sure, in case you didn't hear, the question we're starting with is just run us through your personal experiences and your organizational experiences and experiences of your close colleagues with being censored online by social media platforms.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Is that clear? Right. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for asking me to contribute to this debate. I mean, free speech is something very close to my heart. I'm a journalist. I was involved in sort of changes to the law, the Defamation Act, 2013, and improving free speech for people on matters of public interest. So I was really heartened to receive this invitation to contribute towards this important discussion. I think, to begin with, I just want to commend the SALDEF team for producing what is a very robust and important report on an extremely serious matter. I think, it's beyond belief that foreign governments like India can influence what people are permitted to express overseas, and that's, people like us. We've already had a number of examples from the previous two speakers. In terms of my personal experience as a journalist, I mean, I covered those two moments, if you like, in history: the Amritpal manhunt, as well as the farmers' protest in 2020 and 2021. And when I wrote about these issues for a UK publication, I wasn't directly censored by India per se, but anything that involves criticism of a state invites an inevitable backlash by nationalists, and in this case pro-Modi nationalists, due to the very nature of social media. And notably, I had quite a few pro-Modi journalists, including an editor of a prominent Indian publication, who did respond to my articles on social media, and let's put it diplomatically, in an unedifying manner. Fortunately for me, and I'm sure this is something we're going to touch on later on, the editors that I work with are extremely brave and absolutely believe in the right to free speech, and more importantly, are willing to defend it. And I want to make it clear that in the UK, we have the Human Rights Act in England and Wales, 1998, and Article 10 of that act is freedom of expression. And what it says, and I think it's very important just to lay the context of what we're talking about here, is this right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. And I think that last thing must absolutely be emphasized, because it's quite frankly risible that we are losing that free speech based on foreign interference.
Absolutely. I think there's so much there that's worth underlining and emphasizing. But I think I will underline the last thing you said, the part about beyond frontiers, because I think one thing I found myself saying repeatedly as I advocate on the issue to people who don't know anything about it is we talk about governments and having the right to sovereignty and the voters choosing the government that then rules over them in that space. But there's no international precedent, international law. There's nothing to suggest that it's in any way appropriate for regimes to go global with their censorship, and for regimes to say, by having this sort of shared ancestry, we have this extension over here. I think that's an expression of Hindu supremacy itself, right? The idea that not just that Hindus are an ethnic group, but that their dominion over all others in the diaspora should extend globally. I think, to me, that's to your word risible. I think that's exactly right. I think it's gravely offensive. But we are, as you mentioned in our report, we focus a lot on social media specifically. We focus a lot on the failures of these platforms to do what they say they're going to do. So I would like to pose another question to the three of you, which is essentially, to the extent that you have tried to engage with platforms, and it's fair to not engage at all at this point, but to the extent that you have tried to engage, where would you characterize the failures to be occurring, right? In my estimation, the failure really starts at the top, and the fact that the leaders who are responsible for these global moderation policies fail to consider any of these eventualities. Like they're leaders in name only. They really ingest whatever version of reality is fed to them by the governments that are allowing them to operate in these markets, and then they go back and silence and are complicit in the silencing of advocates like us. And that's to say nothing of how negligent they are in checking that political extremism and political operatives don't get embedded in their decision-making structure the way Modi's officials are embedded in Meta India, which I think is to your point, which I think is the point that was raised earlier about how Twitter is in many ways the most permissive. You look at Meta's policies and they will ban anything about Sikhi at the drop of a hat all over the world. So yeah, that's a lot of, I answered my own question there. So I actually asked the question, to the extent that you've engaged with platforms and tried to address some of this stuff, where would you assess the failures to be most acute? And I guess we can start, let's go reverse order. So maybe Hardeep, you could go first. Sorry, Hardeep, I think you're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I think, George, you kind of answered the question for me, but I think just to add to that, I think the issue really is it kind of goes even beyond the kind of platforms and the politics. It goes to governments. I mean, I think, the reality is that these social media companies, they're the corporations that essentially work on a profit model, the same as governments who kind of look at GDP and looking at the best way of improving that and having trade deals. And I think for me, the thing that sums it up is something that our director of our charity, Lord Singh of Wimbledon, once said. He said, Guru Nanak sort of promoted, truth is high, higher still is truthful living. But the British government promotes truth is high, higher still is trade. So I think if we go to the root cause of the issue, it's actually follow the money, to sum it up. And you can see sort of various gestures that are coming from sort of governments. Recently, there was a minister that kind of made some announcement looking at sort of more cooperation with India on various things, looking at anti-corruption, but also a mention of sort of research into pro-Khalistan extremism, some paltry sum of 95,000, which is just a token gesture just to appease a foreign government, based on attacks on embassies, which obviously all of us will condemn. But this is where the question really lies. It lies in international trade. The issue is really essentially about the money. It's about GDP. It's about profit. And that's why it's a very difficult set of circumstances to push back against.
Yeah, I follow the money, exactly. Just, I see you're off mute. Would you like to take it next?
Yeah, I think just to sort of build on the specifics of this is if you look at Twitter initially, I think it's been difficult to penetrate that organization. I mean, the hypocrisy of it was, I think everyone saw it. Jack Dorsey's after his message around when I think it was in June 23 early this year, where he put a video interview out where he openly admitted that India was censoring Twitter and forcing Twitter to take action against accounts that were posting about the farmers' protest. And if not, Twitter's officers, its individuals, its employees would be harassed and targeted, and went on to say that happened as well. But it's fine him coming out saying it after he'd sold it to Elon Musk, but he did nothing. He presided over Twitter for about over a year and a half while Sikh accounts were being discriminated and their voices being silenced. And I mentioned our accounts, mine and the Sikh Federation was banned in December 21 and January 22. So to admit it afterwards and pass the buck, I feel is a huge failing in the senior leadership of Twitter. But if we look at Meta, Facebook, and Instagram, we've had more success in engaging with that organization than Twitter. And really, it came from November 2020. The Sikh Federation page was banned, and a number of us were banned, restricted personally as well. And it was in rapid succession where they changed the algorithm and effectively we started to receive regular, in fact, daily community standards breach notifications for posts that were going back 2-3 years. And because this algorithm changed, it meant that they were trapping a lot of posts that were fine before and considered a breach now. And then bang, 1, 2, 3, 3 strikes and you're out. Your page was restricted, it was limited, it was banned, and the Federation page was actually deleted. I mean, we had 25, 30,000 followers on our Facebook page, and it was completely deleted off the platform. And it was through a connect that we had. Actually, it was through the Jewish community that we managed to connect with someone in the policy team at Meta and Facebook, as it was then. And through various conversations, we managed to sort of open up. And they had a huge gap with engagement with the Sikh community. They had nobody. And whilst it was interesting, it was ironic actually, because they had us down as an organization that they wanted to engage with in terms of discussion and opening up and getting feedback from the Sikh community. And I said, that's fine, but you've banned us already. And that then what it did, it opened the door to the relevant people of Meta to come involved and look at the policy and explore why our accounts were banned. And over the part of about a year, we managed to sort of build this relationship with the policy team in the UK and also the policy team in charge of terrorism and counterterrorism across Asia Pac. And these were some real interesting discussions that we had with these guys. They knew all about the Khalistan movement. They knew about the organizations, which ones were prescribed, which ones were not, what were some of the traps. And they provided us some training. We hosted a couple of calls with a lot of the Sikh activists in the UK, so they could learn actually why do posts that have sort of nothing in them, just marking the shahidis of our fallen Gursikhs and generals, why were they being targeted and banned? And we had a lot of concern around. There was a lot of conspiracy around. Is this purely targeting Sikh activists? And actually, what we learned was it was the policy and the certain words that were considered, let's just say, glorifying terrorism. It was in their definition. And they go on the list of those organizations considered prescribed or on the terror list in the US, not India's list. And they sort of informed, okay, yes, you can state fact, but if you glorify or promote, then that will fall foul. So we adopted some of their lessons and the conversation continued. And over this year, we successfully managed to unban the Federation page, the Sikh Network page, my personal page, many other pages. But then over that year, through 2021, obviously with the farmers' protest, we had the banning of the hashtag Sikh originally in June 2020 and then again later on. Mm-hmm. And we started to discuss this, and they also admitted that the hashtag farmers' protest was restricted. Now, their response was interesting in that they admitted it was a mistake and it happened by error. And as soon as it got identified, they corrected it. But that really didn't fly around, okay, why did it then happen again? Why was there greater protection placed on it? And we managed to open the conversation with other faiths around, okay, how do you protect the Jewish community from hate crime in using the word Holocaust? And they have safeguards where you can't associate the Holocaust with, let's say, what they did with the hashtag Sikh was pornographic material en masse by bots. And none of those things kind of had been considered or applied for the Sikh community. And what we sort of started with this dialogue was actually A, understanding the rules of Meta and its policies. B, we had an avenue in which we could escalate targeted accounts. And we had a range of, many people listening here would have been part of that. CEU's UK, 1984 Tribute, even the Free Jaggi Now page was banned. Sher Punjab, Punjab 2000, and many others, Basic Sikhi, even Khalsa Aid. So we would highlight these to that team and they would look into it. And more often than not, they would remove the restrictions. So what we saw was the automation standard procedure would block it. Now, whether that was from Indian bots pounding these accounts, raising complaints, reporting our accounts, or whether it was their own algorithm, they never really got into that to tell us where these complaints or where the reports originated from. but we managed to overturn pretty much all of them through this dialogue that we had. So it kind of implied that their process was flawed, that they were overturning these decisions, and we sort of questioned that we really needed a policy for Sikhs, particularly to understand what Shahidi meant for Sikhs, martyrdom, in that you couldn't separate it from our gurus to our present-day Shaheeds, who the Indian state would consider as terrorists. That doesn't apply to us, and you can't just blanket ban certain words. So this opened the whole conversation. But I guess in final, what I'd say was, whilst we were reinstating these accounts, we've now seen, probably start by the end of this, around November, December 22, and from the start of this year, Meta has taken a back step completely.
Just, did you? I don't see a mute icon, but I can't hear you anymore.
Sorry, can you hear
Oh,
me
yeah, you're
now?
back. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, you're back.
That's how to call. Yeah, what we saw with the rise of Amritpal, and when the virus Punjab that really kicked off in Punjab at the early part of this year, what we then saw was a complete cutoff. Now, we thought, okay, maybe people are on holiday, maybe it'll take time, but we had like 6-7 connects there from different departments and teams, and it just went radio silence. So we had Amritpal's page be banned, ours were being restricted again, all the way up to the Federation's page being deleted in July this year. And I must have sent probably 8 to 10 emails to this group, and there's been absolute no response. And that's surprising, and that's where you realize actually there must be external pressure, because for one person not to reply, everybody to go silent, and it's something suspicious going on. And so that's really, I'd say, an upshot of the engagement that we've had with particularly Meta, Facebook, and Instagram, but they've all gone silent, and Twitter's been difficult to penetrate.
That's really interesting. And just Veera, we're going to come to you next, I promise. But I just want to respond briefly. I think that's a really well taken point. The commitment the platforms demonstrate to enforcing their own policies and protecting all users vacillates a shocking amount. And I think with Musk, the regime change has been mentioned with Elon Musk, but also at Meta. When you look at the external environment, to your point, external pressure, even economic pressure, the level of up and down is really disheartening if you're an advocate who tries to engage on these issues, because in a given month, in a given year, depending on the media, depending on how much money the company is making, depending on whether or not the person you're talking to has been laid off, which is a huge concern at the moment, because the people who run these companies don't value this work nearly as much as they do the quote dollars and cents. So I think that's really well taken, and I appreciate that, Jess. So yeah, just for your same question to you, when you specifically engage with the platforms and their moderation teams and the people who ostensibly could overturn some of these algorithmic decisions, what has your experience been, and how positive or negative has that been over time?
Yeah, I guess what I can do is just kind of draw a thread between what the previous speakers have said and just re-emphasize some of the facts that have come through, because it's important to note that when we're talking about engagement, firstly, Twitter have completely refused to engage. I know there's been various attempts, including with staff members of Twitter that are in senior positions that should be able to facilitate such a thing, but we've seen Meta, Facebook, and Instagram hold a couple of meetings, I think like probably about 5 now in the last few years, with what they call Sikh stakeholders of the community, Sikh organizations, and a lot of the organizations that are represented in this discussion were part of those groups. But Twitter have done no such thing. They've completely just ostracized the Sikh community when it comes to engagement and us trying to influence issues of censorship or misinformation on the site. And I'll give an example of how bad the situation has been with Twitter, and actually still is in some ways. For about 6 months, there was a account which was feigning itself to be a Sikh woman, and not just a Sikh woman, but an Amritdhari Sikh woman, an initiated Sikh woman, that was completely dedicated to degrading Sikh women and sexualizing them. So it was taking pictures of, again, Amritdhari Sikh women and it was photoshopping them to make them look overtly sexual. It was putting up pornography and claiming this was sick and just really depraved things of this nature. And even to the extent I was told by one Sevadar call that one of the pictures they took was off a underage call. It was of a Amit Dari Bibi that was under 16, and again, the image was sexualized and manipulated. And I know personally, Sikh Press Association probably sent a dozen different emails over the course of 6 months with this account running freely on Twitter, just being completely ignored. And I know several other people did because it was being raised to us every other week, it seemed like, and nothing was being done. And in the end, the page did go away. I just assume because of the accumulative effect of the amount of reports and complaints that were coming in about that page. But such depraved acts which are done very, very maliciously to malign the community and disrespect the community, that they can go ignored even when they step into the realms of, I guess, and it would be called pedophilia, to sexualize an image of an underage core. That's the kind of thing that is going ignored by Twitter. So that's the state of the situation. And yeah, so they haven't engaged at all. And even now, if we talk about recent incidents under the Elon Musk regime now of Twitter, there was an incident where in Vancouver, a man of Punjabi Sikh background, or at least with a name that alludes to that, was involved in a violent incident where he killed someone in some random fight that broke out in a Starbucks. And we had verified accounts putting out false misinformation stating that this was a Khalistani Sikh act of terrorism that saw an Amit Dari, again, an initiated Sikh, use their Qurban, the small sword, which is the mandatory part of initiated Sikh uniform, to kill someone randomly in an act of terror. Complete misinformation, completely at odds with what police have said about the incident, and just so far from the truth. It's just as devious as just seeing any person of color commit any certain crime and saying, "Oh, that's an example of, let's just say, the Black Lives Matter movement or something along those lines." But this information is still out there. You can see verified accounts, with a blue tick, that still have posts about putting this out there, such misinformation. So Twitter has been absolutely appalling when it comes to engaging on issues that impact the Sikh community, which stem from censorship and fall into misinformation. Beyond that, so I've been part of a few discussions with Meta, Facebook and Instagram. And whilst when we actually get to the discussion, and I actually have to give a shout out to Jindi Singh of Khalsa Aid here, because when we initiated discussions, I think during the first meeting, Facebook and Instagram, Meta, they actually just wanted us to sit through a presentation, and Jindi Singh of Khalsa Aid was like, "Listen, we're not here to sit through your presentation. We want you to answer our questions about issues of censorship." So they were kind of trying to lead us up the garden path a little bit and just, I guess, distract us from being able to ask the key questions that we wanted to. But in the end, we were able to. And we did get some good information. I've shared a link under this Twitter under the Twitter Spaces link that people can read about that meeting that the Sikh Press Association released. And one of the key things for me was that there was an admittance that there are malicious acts designed to censor, like the Sikh hashtag, for example, and other bits of Sikh information, which are kind of spamming pornography sometimes and spamming just complaints and things of that nature that will automatically, as Jazz Singh was saying, we'll get the automated systems to remove some of our content or ban certain profiles and things of that nature. And again, I emphasize that they use the word malicious. These weren't just accidents, as in some way has kind of been suggested. That the term that was used about why the hashtag Sikh or farmers protest was blocked was that there was a perfect storm of incidents that were to do with the offices not being as manned as much during COVID, the pandemic, and just things of that nature. They called it a perfect storm that couldn't possibly be repeated. But then since then, we've seen that incident repeated. And then I go back to them admitting that certain acts are malicious. And it seems that they have a greater influence than even the leads at these organizations would care to admit. So I guess like the failures, we have to be aware they're often conscious, because part of the issue is we're just such a small community that we don't carry enough weight to actually force the hand of these organizations to act when we're suffering censorship. There's probably 20 other communities that are larger, even if it's just slightly larger, or at least more prominent in certain spheres that are they're looking to probably work with or listen to before us. So there's that kind of issue too. And I think we also have to point out too that a lot of this, if not nearly all of it, revolves around things to do with Khalistan and Shahidi, the concept of Shahidi martyrdom within Sikhi. Khalistan being the Free Sikh Homeland Movement, for anyone that's unaware, which is designed to carve out a free home for the Sikhs within what currently makes up India. The censorship that revolves around this also, that the if we're going to talk about failures, I guess there's a failure for non-Indian entities like the social media giants to actually take the time to understand what these are from the Sikh community, but then at the same time also be brave enough to stand up against the Indian state that are misportraying, say, for example, what the Khalistan movement is. Like, why is there such heavy censorship of a democratic, non-binding referendum, for example? That's exactly the way that most people would suggest such a movement for a free Sikh homeland should be carried out. And even though it is being carried out within these kind of parameters for years, even before maybe some of the more salacious posts that have come out recently from those that run this campaign, Sikhs for Justice, they face complete censorship constantly. Every time they would put out, they would create a new account. Within a short period, it would be removed completely. Twitter also banned a website they created from being put on Twitter itself. So I guess the failures are ones that we're quite well aware of within Sikh community circles for a long time, that there's a perception of Khalistan that I guess Western powers are scared to push back against when it comes to the way India frames the Khalistan movement. So yeah, quite a few failures, but in general, I guess to summarize it, is to do with the Khalistan movement, and also to do with the fact that we're a small, tiny community. We're 1% of India. We're 1% of pretty much every other nation we're in, or 2% max and lower, UK, Canada, and so forth. So it is hard to make a dent with these organizations that are dealing with much bigger groups too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the David versus Goliath nature of the problem is very well stated, very eloquently stated. I think I'll also, shameless plug of our reports number 2. This is a recommendation that we advance every single time we publish, which is, among others, it's the need for these corporations to take seriously the practice of developing competence around groups like ours, around tendencies of states to misrepresent facts. Because at the end of the day, everything India does is justified by one or two extremely broad anti-terrorism statutes that are fundamentally undemocratic. And so as long as all they have to do is show that a law exists to force platforms to comply and advance their narrative without interruption, without dialogue, or without certainly any other contrary narratives in the space, we run into these problems over and over again. So thank you all of you for summarizing that. I kind of wanted to take a tangent here, because we, in our interviews and our reports, we like to interview community members and try to surface their stories authentically. And one thing we've heard from a lot of people is the notion of there's a deep blurring of the line, at least from our interviewees, between what comes from private citizens, essentially, whether in India or elsewhere, Hindu nationalists and the like, and what the state actually supports, right? Like the BJP IT cell does actually seem to be the origin point of a lot of different pieces of harmful, hateful, pornographic, inappropriate, whatever the case may be. A lot of this stuff does seem to be effectively government produced from the Indian state. So I wanted to ask, in your experiences, have you seen that sort of centralization and repeated use of key images, hateful memes, hate speech? Have you seen these sort of tropes keep bubbling up across your platforms? Sorry, Jeff, I think you want to take it. Yeah.
I mean, this is something that we've been tackling for a while now, in the there's a couple of points, and one will sort of tie into what Jasveer mentioned. But in terms of India's IT cell has got heavily sophisticated in a very short period of time. And I think it comes back from that strategy. And we have to really look above actually what's going on a global political agenda here, because these things aren't happening coincidentally, or individuals in India just responding. This is a coordinated attack by the intelligence services of India, by the government of India, and it's spreading its influence in the diaspora. So in the UK, Canada, America, Australia, and in Europe. And it's overtly pushing its influence for the government in those countries to go against its own laws. And we've seen that firsthand very recently. And I'll say it was started with the flag incident at the Indian High Commission in London in March this year, which got turned into a massive whirlwind drama by the Indian government, made it hugely political, and whipped up a storm in which they targeted Avtar Singh Khanda as the culprit and the mastermind behind it. And without seeking any factual support, any evidence, you saw not only Twitter, Instagram, all the Indian accounts, bots just activate, and they were sharing information, repeating the same lies to make them the truth, which is the strategy that India used. If you spread lies as far as possible, you keep repeating the same thing, people will believe it. And this is from, not only, it started on social media, it then went on to their mainstream Gordi media. And they were naming Kandar, they were naming others openly, despite them not knowing. And I'll give you one example. News 18, CNN News 18, there's a reporter, Sanjay Suri, who we know well in London. He ran the article, and I called him up. And I said, you're running articles saying Kandar was responsible, he's pulled it down, he's been arrested, there's now an extradition request for him to be deported. I'm like, where have you got this from? This is defamation, and you're going to be sued. Kandar's at work. I've just spoken to him. He wasn't even there. He apologized and he withdrew his article. By then it was too late. And that spread like wildfire because it was a targeted incident. They had a strategy behind it, and that's continued. And we saw this week, actually, the Westminster Police, the Metropolitan Police confirmed that Kandar neither was arrested nor was a suspect in that incident. So we're up against a very, like I said, a very sophisticated and very targeted strategy by the Indians across all media platforms. And it's very difficult to combat that when they also have to their advantage what I would call their Sikh agents, where you've got certain influential Sikh groups, Sikh accounts, Sikh paper organizations that will also support those claims and start to criticize the community themselves, again, based on the same basis lies and misinformation. And it then becomes very difficult to navigate through that and really push the truth out because it's just being buried. And that's what really makes it difficult. And that's really what we're up against at the minute, is that the shining light of the truth is being diminished so much, not only by what you'd say the perpetrators of the darkness and the evil, but also those being misused or used within our own community to really discredit those seeking the truth, which is and I'm sure we'll come on to it, but a challenge that we have to sort of overcome if we're going to really push through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Jasveer, Hardeep, you have anything you want to add? But that's a wonderful summary by Just. Thank you. And I really appreciate the point you made about, one, the overlap and the interplay between social media and mainstream media and Western media and the papers and columnists and things like that. And also, to your point, the collaboration effectively. I think this is true of every community in the diaspora. You can see this in many cases in the Muslim community and the Hindu community, of course. People who are willing and able to repeat, to your point, baseless lies about these groups as spread by the Indian regime to justify brutal crackdowns, global censorship, and everything else that I mean is the hallmark of autocracy. It's a backside to autocracy that's being lived out by the entire diaspora worldwide, and in some respects, it's heartbreaking. So, Jasveer, Hardeep, anything that you'd like to share as well about the point about the coordination we see across all these different levels and sort of multidimensional attack on the truth as the Sikh community lived it?
Yeah,
I mean,
come in. Sorry,
sorry, Hardeep first. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's some important points that have been raised. I think if we sort of take a step back from social media, I'm looking at this from a journalistic lens as well, that Reporters Without Borders rank India 161 out of 180 countries for press freedom in their 2023 global index. So just to give you a flavour of some of the countries that rank higher, Belarus, which is often referred to as Europe's last dictatorship, is higher in the ranking. Palestine is higher in the ranking, and Afghanistan is higher in that particular ranking. So I think there is a real issue here, and I think Godi Media has been made reference to earlier. And one prominent commentator made reference to the Indian media as it currently is with the Modi government as being a lapdog and not a watchdog. And this is very serious for India and for free speech. And for our community, but more broadly for many people. And I think one of the challenges that we have, and we're already seeing people looking to tackle this anyway, but one of the challenges we have is we've got to build better relationships with independent media in India and in the UK, people that are willing to call things out for what they are. We've seen the kind of introduction of bars as an independent platform for Sikhs and Sikh commentators and writers to contribute independently and without fear or favour. So these are all very good signs. But I think if we look at what's happening with the media in India, we look at what's happening beyond that. I mean, the recent example is the Indian Censor Board and the film Punjab 95, which is telling the story of the human rights activist Jaswant Singh Kalra. And the film was just recently pulled from the Toronto Film Festival, which is devastating. And I understand that the producers were already compelled to change the original name, which was Gallukara, which means genocide, to Punjab 95. And it's absolutely outrageous. I mean, it's remarkable because that is an accurate description of what happened. It was a Gallukara. So censorship kind of operates in many different ways across many different platforms, across different ecosystems or environments, if you like. We've certainly seen an absolute deterioration of sort of free speech in terms of the media, according to, as evidenced by Reporters Without Borders ranking. And I mean, India was 150 out of 180 in last year's ranking, and it's gone down by 11 in terms of sort of nations for press freedom in this global index. So I think these things are very important. The other point I want to make, which has been touched on in your report, is the weaponizing media to turn Sikhs into Khalistanis. Now, this is definitely an issue for all UK Sikhs, and the perpetuation of this narrative is frankly sometimes really bizarre. And I've seen what I describe as Hindutva trolls. Whenever there's a crime involving a Punjabi Sikh heritage individual, I think we've already had one example from Jazz, they pin it on Khalistanis. And recently I saw a video which was a Sikh demonstrating some considerable skill with Gurban's, presumably as part of his training regime. And it was subject to the same, frankly, perverse stereotyping that this guy is a Khalistani. I mean, it's absolutely borders on ridiculous. I mean, your report gives a very good example of when Sikhs were heckling Rahul Gandhi over sort of justice for the victims of 1984 and the lack of justice. And immediately the media in India was dubbing them as Khalistanis. And I think, one of the things I took away from your report is that this, and I'll quote from your report, this allows the media and state actors to neatly sidestep the issues driving protest and reduce the anger to a single controversial issue and position them as angry, unreasonable antagonists. And I think this is really broadly what we are facing as a community, that actually the genuine concerns about human rights, the genuine concerns about a country that's bordering at times on authoritarianism is immediately dismissed with creating this sort of stereotype of all Sikhs. And I'll end on this, that for a few years we were involved in a debate, sometimes very heated, admittedly, over a separate Sikh ethnic tick box, which a pro-Khalistani organisation was behind. And so in the end, we suggested, well, look, if people, quite rightly, if they're upset, if they don't want to identify as Indian because they are rightly upset about what's happened in 1984 and the lack of justice for the victims, then perhaps they could write in Punjabi as an alternative. Now, Op India, which is arguably part of the Godi media, they then reported on this and falsely and laughably refer to us as a Khalistani outfit because we suggested this. I mean, to add another layer of perplexity to this, I always thought that an outfit is something you wear to a party, or for the sake of inclusivity for the US and Canadian audience here, a prom.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, to end on this, I think the significant challenge we have, which has been very clearly highlighted in this report, is that the community is facing what is a sobering and apt description in your report of digital warfare. And ultimately, you've got a market of 1.4 billion is threatening, as we've seen as evidenced by Jack Dorsey's comments, which were referred to by an earlier speaker, threatening to shut down their business if they don't toe the line. So these are very serious issues and very serious times. And I think your recommendations, which I'm hoping we'll touch on shortly, will help steer the community in the right direction to try and ameliorate some of these issues.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's so nice to hear someone read the report and cite it. So I really appreciate that from a personal level. Thank you, Hardeep. Jasveer, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to summarize, we need to recognize this isn't just an issue of just censorship that we're facing, but it's a constant stream of misinformation and disinformation coming from the Indian state, which is landing on the heads of the Sikh community, or all different various sections of the Sikh community, which we're looking to counter as well. And there, unfortunately, seems to be a cognitive dissonance, but when it comes to the media, when it between differentiating between what is going on in India, which can be reported on in quite an accurate and balanced manner under the Modi regime. We've seen a recent BBC documentary which highlights his involvement in the Gujarat massacres of 2002. There's an article out now in the New York Times which is titled "India is on the Brink" and talking about the fanatical nationalism which is poisoning the common communities out in India. But when they go from there to covering an issue which they have to get information from their Indian contacts about, when it comes to, for example, the Punjab under siege situation and Biomitpal Singh, there's a complete disconnect. They will report on this such situations in a way which pretty much regurgitates Indian state positions that the Biomitpal Singh's movement, for example, was one of violence, one which was purely based on separatism, and which was, espousing notions of the 80s where things were apparently, and again, contrary to kind of Sikh understandings of the situation, but were apparently really unstable and dangerous at the time. And this isn't really the case as far as the reports that we often get from within Sikh community circles, more at a grassroots level. And when we try and influence media like the New York Times into kind of covering this and say, look, keep in mind, once again, just to repeat again, that the Indian state is viewed as the 161st country when it comes to press freedom of 180 countries. So you're getting information from sources which is compromised, to say the least. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to kind of have the impact that we'd like it to. And I'll just give one example of the farmers' protest. So when the farmers' protest was, in the minds of some anyway, concluded, the BBC, in their article about it, they said dozens had died whilst participating in the farmers' protest. The actual figure, and there was, for example, a board that was set up in Surrey, Scots Road, where the protest was happening daily to support and stand in solidarity with those that were part of the protest. They had 700 names, 700 pictures of individuals that were passed away during the farmers' protests. Yet the BBC would report it as dozens. And we know how they come to those kind of conclusions and that sort of information. And it is by bypassing the Sikh community and just going straight to kind of Indian sources. And that is a great shame, and that shows an example of how that coordination between the disinformation that filters through from India and mainstream media or even regional media picking up those sources really has a negative impact on the Sikh community.
Yeah.
But you can just add something, because I think it's an important thing that we kind of touched on, and it sort of closes want to close the section, but certainly highlights the significance of what we've talked about. Because whilst there's been, we talked about social media, mainstream media, but what's happened is this hype, this misinformation, what it's led to is actually influencing government policies abroad, and that's the real threat. If we talk about the UK, I know in Canada, there was a report in which inappropriately Khalistan extremism was mentioned, and the Sikh community got together and they forced the withdrawal of that comment. And in the UK, we've had the Bloom Review, which coined a phrase pro-Khalistani extremism without any evidence, without any sort of comparable data, without any due process, taken blind comments from individuals and disproportionately elevated, created and manufactured this term without any sort of corresponding supportive evidence from either the Metropolitan Police or the Commission for Counter-Terrorism, which both of them have zero risks or zero cases of Sikh extremism, let alone Khalistani extremism. But this has been exposed as a tactic and a policy by the Indian government to promote and elevate people that have in these countries as academics, as writers, as independent researchers, to publish such material that the government can then rely on to then drive policy. And we're seeing this directly. We've seen this movement from social media, silencing dissent from within the community, ostracizing the community within itself, so challenging the credibility of the well-established organizations and those calling out human rights breaches. And we've seen TV channels being targeted. The mainstream media in India run these lies that then get picked up by the mainstream media in this country. So we've had articles which we've challenged published in The Guardian, in Sky News, on the BBC. And when we challenge them, they say this was a cable that came from Reuters or the Associated Press, which the originators was the Godi media. So they're just doing very lazy journalism and just reprinting these stories. And then they're making themselves into government policy. We have now, I'm looking at a letter that I received today from the Home Office through my MP, that there is a task force set up in the UK, a joint task force between the government of India and the Foreign Office in London to tackle this, again, coined phrase, pro-Khalistani extremism, which just exists. So this is where it gets dangerous. Now we're trying to change government policy and ministers' view. And what I think Jasveer said earlier, being a minority community, we've been demonized. We're the victims of a genocide. We're the victims of censorship and silencing. And now we're having to change the minds of policymakers and decision makers that are all spoon-fed this narrative. And it's really concerning and dangerous. What I'd say.
Absolutely. It's concerning, it's dangerous, it's frustrating, it's unfair, right? Ultimately and fundamentally, I think everything you said is so well taken, and you put a bow on it. The one thing I would underline is I would argue the term Khalistani itself is an example of that, right? No one in this day and age calls themselves a Khalistani, whether or not they sympathize with the idea, but every single media article we saw in the American media, I'm talking the Washington Post and New York Times, the word Khalistani was in the lead, it was in the title, it would show up every paragraph. And it's, again, this, as you mentioned, this fundamental laziness, I would say arrogance, of these regimes, and this idea of, oh, India's been in democracy for a while and therefore nothing can ever change. Institutions can't be eroded. A single-minded dictator could not rise and sort of warp the entire system. That's exactly what happened. And to your point, it is dangerous to everyone in the diaspora that the Western media and Western governments continue to pretend that it's business as usual just because Modi has strategically positioned himself between the West and China. So thank you all so much. That was very, very insightful, very, 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 very interesting. We are slightly over time, so here's what I'll do. I will roll my last two questions up into kind of one question, and then we'll kind of go around and hopefully you all have as much time as you need. At least I have nowhere to be that's more interesting than this, to kind of speak out and wrap up. So the two questions I want to roll into one are like in terms of recommendations. Right, we talked a lot about the problem, about the scope of it, about the dimensionality of it, but in terms of what can be done, both in terms of I think the recommendations in our report geared towards social media were mentioned. So obviously, and what platforms can do or should do, but also what would you say to community? What would you say to someone who might be listening now or might tune in later and hasn't really thought about the issue because they may not see it as that important, they may not be that plugged in? How would you set about fixing the problem? Which is again overly reductive. It's not something one individual or one organization can do. But yeah, I just like to hear from you all after so much thought and clarity and precision on the issue. I would love to hear what you all think are some of the best ways moving forward. So perhaps we can start with Hardeep.
Hi. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of clarify one point that Jazz made. This reference, pro-Khalistani extremism, was first coined in the Shawcross review of Prevent, so the independent review of Prevent. So that's the first time that appears in the lexicon, if you like. On this, I guess recommendations wise, I think there's a number of things. I mean, there's examples from your report. I mean, you gave a very good illustration of how American Sikhs lobbied to Congresswomen during the Amritpal manhunt because there were fears around what could happen if violence sort of escalated. Because we had already seen by that point paramilitaries kind of flooding Punjab and another kind of authoritarian sign with the cutting off of suspension of sort of 4G internet on mobile phones and SMS services, which you don't normally associate with democracies. So I think the letters that the intervention by these two congresswomen, based on SALDEF's efforts and the community's concerns in America, I think really kind of supported that, helped prevent any sort of escalation, or certainly put it on the broader stage for people to kind of acknowledge policymakers that something could go wrong. So I think that the kind of piece around lobbying politicians is a very important piece. Certainly happens in the UK. There's many organisations. I often laugh at this. There's more. We've got more leaders than actually Sikhs, but that's a whole other debate. Working together, I think, is important. So despite our differences, whatever our kind of ideologies are, or whatever kind of group that we belong to, I think one thing we share in common is that we believe in the Guru Granth Sahib. And I think we need to, as a community, work across all organisations when there's a common goal and it's an aligned goal. And most people are willing, to pull resources and effort. I think that we need to see, definitely in the UK, I'm talking about, not talking about Canada or America. I have no understanding of the Sikh politics there, but I think from a UK perspective, I think that is a really important piece of work to look at in the future. I think we've already seen the example, I've mentioned it earlier, like bars, which has been set up by Jiskaran, and that's been very successful from what I've seen in a very short time frame. And I think that's the key thing, that look, we're all storytellers. We all have the ability to tell a story. We can all demonstrate how we feel or what we're thinking by writing. No, you don't have to be a NCTJ trained journalist in the UK to write. There's many people who are writers who haven't actually had any journalistic training, who are prominent writers and authors. So I think that's really important. I think everybody has that option. We can all write. We can build relationships where independent media who are willing to stand up for free speech and aren't kind of influenced by foreign politics. We need to build those relationships. I mean, something that I've been kind of working on over the last few years. There are some brilliant media outlets out there who are really brave and whose editors are always willing to support the underdog, be it the farmers, be it what happened recently with the propaganda being pumped out about during the Amritpal manhunt. Start writing. I mean, my key thing, I think, for all the listeners is start writing. You are the storytellers. But I think I'll provide a caveat with that as well, that although I'm encouraging everyone to write, I think be aware that there are certain pitfalls and laws that you need to to consider when you're writing. For example, defamation, copyright infringement, and contempt laws. So read up on these things, learn about them. Arm yourself. And I'll end on a bit of a cliche, but the pen can sometimes be mightier than the sword.
Yes.
And on a final note, I think and this comes directly from your report that and we've heard from some of the other speakers around this, that we absolutely have to demand transparency around content moderation and what the standards are that are being set by social media companies. And that's something that's been emphasized in your report. And I think that is essential. You've got to keep knocking on the doors. I know, obviously, we've heard from Jazz about the efforts that have been happening from the Sikh Press Association. And I think that is something that we can all do as individuals as well as organisations. We need to hold these people to account. We need to understand exactly what is going on and how they are influenced by foreign governments, and what is their own content moderation, and what is influences from outside, which is shifting the goalposts for content moderation and standards.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hardeep. Jasveer, you want to go next?
Yeah. So I guess just in relation to what was just being said by Hardeep, not only should we be looking to create more content ourselves and writing more ourselves, we need to be conscious of what we share when it comes to what we're doing, what we're looking to put forward about the Sikh community. We have bars, we have the Sikh Press Association, we have Sikh Siyasat, we have Pant Punjab, we have various Sikh outlets now, media outlets, that can provide the right kind of analysis and context when it comes to covering Sikh issues. If we're constantly sharing media coverage from, say, the BBC about Sikh issues, when people start getting the impression that the Sikhs or the Khalistanis are just a bunch of extremists because they're regurgitating stuff from India, we've got no one to blame but ourselves, because we're sharing that content as well. And even if they've got it right once in every 5 articles, the next 4 that come out that we might not share, people might still be looking in that direction for their understanding of Sikh issues. And in fact, Baijagraj Singh, the reason he set up the Sikh Press Association, the late great Baijagraj Singh, one of the great leaders of recent times from within the Sikh community, was specifically because he said the majority of the Sikh community, they're still looking to the BBCs for understanding of Sikh issues. They're still looking to the Sky News, the CBCs, whoever they might be. They're not looking at their local Pracharak, for example, the local Sikh educator or the Sikh community group, whoever it might be, for an understanding of Sikh issues. So that's why we are tasked with the responsibility to try and influence those institutions into understanding our situations better, or even just policing them and coercing them into covering our things in the right way when necessary. So yeah, we need to be more conscious about what we share. We also have to just admit that social media, and especially Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, it's always going to be compromised. We're facing up against a state, the world's biggest democracy, as they like to label themselves. So we're not going to win that battle with being able to influence Facebook and Twitter more than the Indian state, the Sikh diaspora, as influential as we can be. That's a battle we're never going to completely win. It doesn't mean we should stop engaging. It doesn't mean we shouldn't put effort that way, but we should also be conscious that we have to start creating our own platforms. We have to start empowering ourselves now and finding different means now to share our work, share our content, get our voices out there where they won't be so censored. So that's very important. And I would also say that when it comes to Sikh leadership as well, aside from working together, there also needs to be a bit more courage. I mentioned the example of Jindi Singh of Khalsa Aid telling the Meta management that we're actually refusing categorically to sit through your presentation that you're looking to show us, and we just want you to answer our questions. We need more of that kind of leadership, more bold leadership, where we're holding these organizations and institutions to account about the way they depict us, because these things have deep repercussions. We look at the situation of Jagtar Singh Johal, the British Sikh political prisoner. Sometimes the justification that's given about why he's in prison now for 6 years without being charged for anything is because of the kind of coverage that underlines Sikh supporters of Khalistan, or those that are supporting the freedom fighters of 1984 as extremists. And that's what kind of is bandied about when it comes to Jaggi through Indian mouthpieces. So yeah, again, we just need to create our own spaces, share our own content, and also be a bit bolder when it comes to our leadership of being able to stand and say, look, you might look at these people as terrorists, but they are our leaders, they are respected figures, and we're willing to sit down and push back against that and engage about it and explain our reasoning to anyone, anywhere, any place. We're not just going to cower away and try and reimagine or tailor our narrative to fit in with whatever moderation you're doing. So you need to be a bit more brave in that sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Jasveer. Jess?
Yeah, I think I'll just really touch on some really important points. And I want to also echo.
Sorry, we may have lost you again, Jess. I apologize. Oh, there, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying the need for all of us to be braver and have the courage to speak up, because the biggest threat to us all is if we all start to be afraid, have second thoughts on posting something. Oh, will I get targeted? Will I get banned? And if I was to say, the most commonly asked question I get when we meet in the Sangat is, oh, are you okay going back to India? Or can you do, what happens when you post this? I'm like, why are you not always worried about it? Right? But this is what they want. I mean, to look at solutions and think about what we do next, we really need to understand what the real threat is, and what the real agenda is here. This isn't an accident, or this isn't random. This is very calculated and specific. And we need to understand it as that. And only then can we really work together around what solutions we can do to tackle it. And as Jazzy said, we might not be able to compete evenly, but what we can do, as what we've been doing for the last 40 years, is expose it. And I think once we recognize that where this threat is being originated from and how it's operating, then we need to collectively, and I think we can really do this because we've done it in pockets, is work together. Where in the past we've had political influence, and now we're seeing a great influence in the US, and then Canada. And I think what we need to do, we're seeing in the UK, certainly with this Conservative government, but I'd also say Labour are probably no different. And they're so hesitant, they're so afraid to raise these issues and speak out. And I'm talking at a local MP level. Whilst they know it's all happening, they know it's all wrong, they don't have that own courage, because it will just get shut down in the party. And that's the power that the Indian government have over foreign governments and foreign politicians. And what we've seen where we've had success is because a foreign leader has raised it, whether it was Jagmeet, the leader of the NDP, posting stuff, whether it was pop stars posting stuff, whether it was more other personalities, other politicians. And then you force our own to say, hold on, if they're talking about it, what's wrong with you? So we're going to have to be slightly coordinated on how we create that, drive global coordination to create that political influence, because I don't think any of us can do it in isolation, because, like I said, that the weight of the Indian government is far greater than any of our local influence can be. But collectively, we can work up to expose it. And the second part I think we need to focus on is something we can all do individually. Is, and I've said this before, is we really need to support our own organizations and our groups. We're all volunteers mostly. We all do this as seva because we feel that pain for what's happened to our community, and we're dedicated to really bringing the truth out and justice. So when Sikh organizations, those that are politically minded, are putting things out or being targeted, please share it, because when things start to go viral, organizations take note. And whether that's through everyone on this call or all those listening, just share it, follow these organizations, share their posts, stand up when they're being exposed, and contact your own local MPs. Because whilst you might think you contacting your MP or your local news editor might not make a difference, but when thousands do that individually, it creates an issue and it creates a force. And we've seen the successes of that when it was around the Kakars being banned, whether it's about the Sikh identity. So we can do that when they're attacking our organizations and our voice, which is really what this is about. It is about silencing our dissent and raising these issues. So that is be the key thing, I'd say, because what we need to really work together on is not only supporting each other, but also exposing those that are targeting it, and really taking these gatekeeper positions. And what we have, this is probably the most dangerous threat that we have, is that the state, both the British, and I'm sure it happens in Canada, America, and Europe, is when they start to decide what Sikhi is, and they start to decide who a Sikh is, and then who a Sikh leader is, and who a Sikh representative is, then we're in a very, very difficult and challenging position. And we've seen that here, that the government will tell us, the community, who our representatives are. And more often than not, they're not even practicing Gursikhs, or they're not even Sikhs anyway. We've had atheists speak for the Sikh community. We've had non-Amritaris be nominated as religious leaders. So this is the line and the trajectory that this is going, and we need to really challenge that. And by staying silent and letting it happen and thinking others will speak up, we're really just becoming complicit to it. So everyone has a voice. Yes, they might start with the big orgs and the individuals, but they're going to come for everyone. So unless we all speak up, we're going to make the task a lot easier for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That's excellent, really. Yeah, so thank you. Generally speaking, this was excellent. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a privilege to platform our panelists and listen to their stories from the front. This is a fight that will continue. This is a fight that really matters. And I think if I had to boil down everything that was shared just now, I would say it comes down to agency. It comes down to telling the story and taking advantage of it and being really engaged in your democracy. Because in a lot of countries all over the world, the people in power have no obligation to respect those who vote for them, and vote can be in quotation marks. But in the countries we're talking about, in the states we're talking about, I think that battle is not lost. So I really hope people take that to heart. So thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us today. This is a really important issue, and I think I can speak for everybody who spoke for the past hour and a half. We will continue to speak out against it. This Twitter space was hosted by SALDEF. If you want to learn more about Sikh censorship, please visit www.saldef.org/Sikh censorship. And I will share as well for everybody listening, we have pinned a couple of important tweets with relevant links relating to our reports and to our day of action to the top of this space. So please, if you could, share our tweets and use the toolkit to call out Twitter leadership for our day of action all day today. I think that's everything. Thank you again to our panelists. This was fantastic. And everyone else, have a great day. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.